All right. So moving on to the explanations for rising inequality. And so I've kind of highlighted the five that I think are most important. I think you could find other explanations out there. These are the five that I think are um, probably the most pertinent or driving the increases that we do see in inequality. Superstars, skill bias, technological change, globalization, weakening unions, and assortative mating. So first one is the superstars. So with kind of the internet and with um, lower trade costs, it is increasingly the case that like a dominant person or a dominant company can command more of the market, and this kind of crowds out those like smaller producers or smaller individuals who maybe existed in like a local market. Um, and so like you think of I don't know, like you think of you could kind of think of like um, say a comedian or something like that. Like you used to be able to be a local comedian and kind of make a decent living at your whatever local show, but now this is way back in the day. This is like way back in the vaudeville days, in like the 50s and 60s, even before that probably. But now with like the mass media, like YouTube, if you're like great, you can command this large audience, and um, people don't go out to watch the comedian. They could just stay home and watch the comedian on Netflix or whatever. Or in firms, you used to have a bunch of regional firms, say in the U.S. Kind of doing the same thing but for their region. But since trade costs have come down by so much, it's so much easier to ship things to places. You kind of have one dominant firm that serves the entire country, or actually increasingly one dominant firm or one dominant manufacturing company that kind of services the whole world, because the trade costs globally have fallen as well. I mean, you could even so there's like increasingly this concentration where the superstar is kind of getting this bigger audience, and kind of crowding out these like smaller players. And you think of like newspapers. It's like, okay, now there's the New York Times is doing fine, but all these regional papers are kind of gone. Everyone just reads the New York Times on online. And kind of this is playing out in multiple different markets, multiple different industries. Okay, and this is also applicable to cities. So it's like, as I was saying, like these you used to have the regional firms kind of servicing those areas. As those transportation costs have fallen, kind of the concentration of industries in certain cities has grown, and kind of the importance of other cities has fallen. And so, in the U.S., it's like our dynamic cities, kind of our coastal cities, our West Coast cities, San Diego, LA, San Francisco, the Bay Area, Seattle, and then Eastern Seaboard, DC, Boston, New York. Those are kind of like our superstar cities that have been increasingly more both dominant economically, but culturally as well. So that's kind of the one trend that is driving inequality. This is the big one, though. This is the big one that's also pointed. This is like kind of the big one that kind of dominates the literature: skill bias, technological change. And so, kind of here you have manufacturing in 1955. You have a bunch of people doing work, um, good work, honest work, but unskilled in the sense that often did not require much prior training to do the job. Essentially, you could do the job with a high school diploma. And that's not to take anything away from its value. It's just, most people would be qualified to at least enter this job. Of course, other people, you might excel at it differently, but to get the job, you did not have to have any sort of special qualifications. Compare this. Now, this is the car being made, essentially made with robots. Recently, the kid, my kid, got into Legos, and I've been watching like Lego YouTube videos, and how Legos are made, and it's like all robots. Like there's barely any humans made in the production of Legos. And I'm sure back in the 50s and 60s there are plenty of humans making Legos. But this is basically what manufacturing looks like. Now compare this to this. So somebody has to build these robots, somebody has to program these robots, somebody has to make sure the robots are running smoothly. That is a very high skilled specialized job. I mean, that is a job that you need to have a master's in computer science or something to program and run this, or systems management or something. And so basically you have this transition from unskilled work or work that doesn't require much qualifications to incredibly specific work that requires lots of training. And that's basically what we're talking about with that skill bias technological change. In the 1800s and then in the early 20th century, that's the opposite was basically happening. So the technological developments then really, we switched to kind of artisan-based economy to a manufacturing economy. So people, there'd be like a local shoemaker, a local whatever tailor, and then these things we moved to mass production of these goods, and that was a transition from skilled labor, the skilled cobbler, the skilled tailor, to unskilled labor, to workers working in a manufacturing plant. And so that type of technological development that took place in the back half of the 1800s into the early 1900s really favored low skilled workers, and that reduced income inequality. So essentially, in the 1950s and the 1940s and 50s, post World War II, United States, you don't even actually have to graduate high school. You could get a good job, working at the local factory, right out of high school, or even you could leave high school, work at the factory, and you could have a decent job without much preparation, because of these manufacturing jobs were now using kind of unskilled labor rather than what was taking place before. Now we see the reverse of that. Those jobs have been replaced by automation. Has essentially been replaced, well, either by globalization or automation. And so now it's like you need to, go to school forever in order to get a job. Okay. And so this technological change that we've seen in recent decades has really favored the high skilled workers. And by this, we mean like, extra years of education, even beyond a bachelor's. Okay. And so, all right. So, and it really increased the productivity of these workers. So these workers can do a lot more. Essentially, those new technologies are complements to what they do. You think about what I do, all the fancy statistical software that has come into place, has really helped me do economic analysis. Now it's like what used to be done by hand, or what used to be done with like a slide rule, or what used to be done by a bank of computers that would take forever. Now I can do in 1 second on my laptop. All right. Or if you think my other job, which is writing for animated shows, it's like, again, there's a lot of complementarity to the technology. Animation is much more done with computers, and it makes it much easier to make animation than it was in the past, where it was a hand-drawn thing. And so again, that benefits these high-skilled workers that can be much more productive at the expense, or not necessarily at the expense, but essentially those jobs have been replaced. What used to be done with unskilled work is now replaced with computers. Okay, and so there's not really demand for those workers that don't have those advanced years of education, or really advanced specialized skills. Again, not making a value judgment on their worth or that type of the job. Those jobs have just gone away. So now if you're in that small town that used to have a factory, there's no factory for you. All right. And so here you can see it in the real wages, essentially exploded for those that have greater than a bachelor's degree. They've gone up for those with a bachelor's degree, but they've been stagnant or even dropped for those with, less than a bachelor's degree. And this is skill bias technological change. Essentially, there's plenty of high paying jobs for this group, less so for these other groups. And by the way, it's like the demand for this work has not kept a pace with the supply. So if you talk to anybody in Silicon Valley, it's like they cannot find enough skilled workers. They cannot find workers to fill the positions. And so the wages just keep going up and up and up. That's the only way it can attract good workers, if there's not enough. And there just isn't enough. It's just we are not producing enough skilled workers with those specialized skills. We're not producing enough of those technical skills to really fill the jobs that is being demanded by industry. And so we have this relationship where there's no jobs down here, but there are actually so many jobs up here and too few people. So what adjusts is the wages. All right, those are our first two explanations. More to come.